5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first discussion/analysis type video here on the Game Professor channel. I am your host, the Game Professor, and today, as I said on both Tuesday and Thursday, we are going to be discussing the topic of adaptation and video games. And I expect that most of you are wondering why I want to talk about this. And the reason is that it's a really interesting topic, especially as we continue to see more and more adaptations of all sorts of media into different forms of media as we continue through time. And I find that a lot of people have weird expectations when it comes to adaptations. So I thought we'd open up the discussion here within our little community. So first off, specifically with video games and adaptations, I wanted to delve into some of the expectations that people seem to have. And starting off, let's start with going from something like a movie to a game. And that is definitely a point where we have issues, so to speak, with that transformation. And the main reason for that is because when you are making a licensed game, as they are called, you're often not going for a great end product. You see this a lot with games that are movie tie-ins, like the Golden Compasses. And I've already pointed out some elements of the game that kind of fall into this category of really showing why licensed games aren't that great. And the big reason for that is they're a cash grab primarily, so they get rushed. You're really just trying to gamify whatever element of the movie or TV show that you can, rather than really trying to create a good game version of whatever the source material is. And that kind of is where people expect games to be. You don't see movie tie-in games getting put on lists of top games of the year. In fact, 2 licensed games are considered to be among the worst games of all time. Those being E.T. and the N64 Superman game. Now, what's the point of making these games from a company's perspective? Really, what it'll come down to is that they know that they have an existing market and they want to get more money out of it. So they'll do something, or they'll make something, work with some gaming development company, and just get something put out really quickly. These are usually developed in less than a year, and you can see it in the finished product. For reference, the Golden Compass came out in 2007. You can see games from 2007 that have much better graphics, much better gameplay, and it ultimately, in a lot of ways, is not really a fun game to play. But before we really delve into discussing the Golden Compass specifically, I did also want to talk about the other type of adaptation that is becoming more and more associated with video games now, and that is going from video games to film. And there, you basically have an existing game audience, the player base, that knows that the movie, in their eyes, is not going to be as good as the game because it's not a game anymore. So that transition from a playable medium to a purely, this is reductive, but aesthetic medium, it's not an easy transition to make. It's very similar to going from a book to a movie or a TV show because you inherently lose something when you go from one medium to another. And because of that loss of gameplay within the storytelling element of the game, or of the movie, as it were, the player base knows that it's going to not be as complete an experience. There's really no way to make a playable experience for a film unless you are doing some sort of interactive movie, which, for the most part, when you're thinking about an interactive movie, most people are going to put it more in the game category. And there's an entire subgenre of games that could be called interactive film. So there's really this difficult hurdle to get over when you're going from the game to the film medium. But back to our original point, really what brought me to this topic right now on the channel is looking at the Golden Compass specifically. Now, I've already mentioned in my commentary a couple times that there's this little bit of play with gameplay that is actually doing something really pertinent in this game. Now, I apologize for anybody who has not read the books. His Dark Materials, The Golden Compass, / The Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. They've been out for decades now, so I'm kind of assuming a spoiler warning is not in order, but just in case, spoiler warning. Lyra's entire gameplay in the games really is based on her ability to deceive people. This is exactly what she does in the books. That is the crux of her character in a lot of ways. It's her ability to manipulate, to deceive, to get on the good side of people and be able to discover things. She ends up being known as Lyra Silvertongue at the end of the Golden Compass by Uric, her bear protector, who obviously in the game we see is our primary source of combat-based gameplay. Now, the use of platforming for Lyra could be a bit of a call to the fact that one of the things that Lyra does, especially when she is at Oxford in England, is that she explores around the school. She climbs on things. Her being on the roof with Roger in the game is something that does indeed happen in the books. She climbs around, gets dirty, gets in trouble for it, kind of representative of the fact that she's still a child and is therefore very playful. But other than that, the use of platforming is not terribly significant. The use of mini games for Lyra, while it is a way to gamify some elements, it really isn't a good way to gamify it. You could see from the mini games that we've seen so far at this point, which I just realized I'm jumping ahead of myself. You've only seen the combat-based mini games for her, but even there, it's essentially a game of Simon. You're using the left stick to go in whatever direction it prompts you to go in. That isn't real gameplay. She's not actually fighting. It's not like timing attacks properly in blocks like you are conceivably doing with Yurik, even though, as I commented in the first video, it's a little button mashy. It's pretty easy to just mash buttons and get through it. So not great when you get into the real nitty-gritty of the gameplay, but it's the general concept of the overall gameplay that ends up being pertinent. So, like I said with Lyra, it's the fact that she is a deceiver, she's a bit of a sleuth. The exploration element of her gameplay, and insofar as that influences the platforming, becomes pertinent. But mini games, pretty pointless. And then for Yurik says this in the game. He says armored bears are made of war, or are made from war. So he enjoys fighting the same way that Lyra enjoys breathing. It is completely perfect that he is a combat-based avatar for the player in this game. Again, that being said, the actual gameplay is subpar because it's very button mashy, but the idea behind it is still pertinent. And to turn back to the expectations that people have about licensed games and about adaptation in games in general, like I said, these games are usually developed very quickly. There's not a lot of real thinking about how it's going to function. Turning to the two games I previously mentioned as being considered some of the worst games in the history of gaming, E.T., I've never played it, but what I've seen of it, and granted, this is usually the same clip that I see over and over again, it looks like you're just kind of moving E.T. around and trying to grab things. That has nothing to do with the movie, and it is a really random gamification of the character. Like, why are we doing this? And then for Superman, the N64 Superman, yes, he flies. Yes, he picks things up and can be the Man of Steel and all this stuff. But the purpose behind all this is to save humanity, be a superhero. And if the game is so badly designed that in order to do that, it's impossible, and the fact that levels are so repetitive that there's really no point in the adventure, you don't really get much from it. And I would say these are prime examples of games that the developers were really banking on just the recognition and the popularity of the pre-existing media, and didn't really take the time to make something that is purposeful or meaningful in a game sense. By contrast, you can look at some of the games that are that were developed in conjunction with the Harry Potter series, for example. I have primarily played the handheld game, so stuff going back to Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced, and DS. I believe I played the DS games a little bit as well. Those games, you're trying to gamify a school. So not really that easy to gamify, but they still managed to do it. And one of the ways that they did it was they artificially created this element of challenges when you're going to class. And this is how you learn spells that you are able to use in later bits of gameplay down the line that are actually influencing the narrative more. So while it's not an accurate representation, it still is a passable gamification of the process of learning spells and the learning of the gameplay mechanics. So in that sense, it becomes more successful. One other interesting element in the, I believe it's in Prisoner of Azkaban for a Game Boy Advance, that game also utilized some turn-based RPG style gameplay, and that was interesting because you had to contend with elements of random number generation in terms of how much damage you are going to inflict, your opponent is going to inflict on you, and you're dealing with a team-based element, which, when looking at Harry Potter, so much of what Harry is doing is based around the team that he's created with Ron and Hermione. Another game series, I'm going to call it, another set of adaptations that does a decent job is the adaptations associated with the Lord of the Rings film series. I've only played 2 games from that and different platforms for that. One is the PC version of the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and the other being Lord of the Rings, The Third Age on Game Boy Advanced. And very different games. The Return of the King is action-adventure style. You are controlling a character, choosing when to attack. You have live enemies coming at you, and you are trying to complete these tasks within a game world. It had a fixed camera. The camera was altered based on where you were, but it was a well-designed camera. It never felt strange where it placed you or how it faced you. It felt like a very organic sort of movement through the space. It was set up in a third-person perspective. Very effective game, and a really and provided an interesting set of trajectories to go through the story, because it split the narrative in 3 ways, which effectively happens in the book and the movie. You have Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli on one path. You have Gandalf and Pippin on another path, and then you have Frodo and Sam on a third path. So, purposeful choices. Gameplay, nothing really special. Your attacks and everything are based on the character you're playing. So nothing super spectacular, but a very enjoyable game and a purposeful gamification of the combat, which works well. In the case of The Third Age, it's a turn-based troop control type game. I am forgetting what genre it technically falls into right now because brain is not working, but again, very enjoyable. You have generals that determine the number of moves you get within a flank. You decide to attack. You have ranged attacks and melee attacks. Some troops do not have one or the other, so you have to be tactical with it. It would be some form of tactical genre. So I apologize. I'm forgetting all of the various game genres right now. But again, very enjoyable and a good way, particularly when you think about it, Lord of the Rings, you are dealing with the War of the Ring. So having it in this tactical setting, where you're controlling troops, it is a war-based focus, and because you don't play as Frodo or Sam, I found this to be very pertinent because you have world-sized stakes, and ultimately, it's relying on the fact that Aragorn becomes king. So, focusing on that larger world element and kind of just letting Frodo and Sam do their thing in the background of the game. The final battle at the Black Gate, you have to survive a certain number of turns, and then it is randomly determined after you reach that number of turns that Frodo destroys the ring. So it's again, use of random number generation in an effective manner, but you're dealing with a really cool interpretation of the story. So those are some cases of games that I think take the process of adapting and their function as licensed games in a meaningful manner. Again, they're still not the best games. These are not AAA titles that are trying to win awards. Their real function is to make money, or rather, I should say, AAA games trying to make money that are good, or indie games that are trying to really affect the genres of games and really affect the medium of games. These are games that are their main function is to make money, and these Harry Potter games and these Lord of the Rings games did a good job with that, in my opinion. This game, Golden Compass, is not as good as those games in terms of gameplay. It really very clearly suffers from the fast development timeline that you're dealing with a lot of licensed games. But where they do succeed really is in making choices about the type of gameplay that you're dealing with the two playable characters. Yorick as the combat character, Lyra as the exploration character, and the main person-to-person interaction is really pertinent to their characters. And furthermore, we haven't gotten to this point yet, but this game also functions as a bit of an adaptation of both the film, The Golden Compass, and of the book, The Golden Compass, or / The Northern Lights. It actually corrects some mistakes that they made in the film adaptation in terms of narrative, and I find that really interesting. So we'll get to those points later down the road in the Let's Play and continue to discuss. But I think that's everything that I have to say on this topic today. Very informal. That's kind of how I'm going to be approaching these discussion and analysis videos going forward. This will be a little bit more informal, and I'm going to be aiming to put more in-depth analysis on my website. Speaking of which, follow the link to the website. I will be trying to put up weekly content there in the blog. That's where all of the more in-depth analysis will be. This week is a little weird. I did not get anything written beforehand for this video, but for the most part, what I'm going to be aiming is to have posts going live with my videos here so that you kind of get a taste of the informal and the formal all together. Also follow the link to my Discord server. That's where I really want to be able to have a conversation with you all. We can talk about these topics. We can talk about the games I'm playing. You can make suggestions of games for me to play, all that good stuff. And then, of course, as always, most important thing, hit that subscribe button so you always know when I have a video coming up. That is the way that this discussion can occur. I need you to know what I'm doing. So please hit that subscribe button so you always know when I have a video. Follow my links to the website, the Discord, and my Facebook page. And as always, thank you for watching. I will see you on Monday with the next episode of Stardew Valley coming out. And then, of course, the next episode of The Golden Compass will be out on Tuesday. So thank you again for watching. I will see you next week.